Have you ever felt like what you have isn't enough? Like your resources are just too little to meet your needs? Well, you're not alone. There's a story in the Bible that talks about a widow who had nothing but a small jar of oil. But through her faith, God turned her little oil into abundance. So today's video, we're diving into the story of the widow's oil from 2 Kings 4 1 through 7, and how it reveals the power of God to provide, even when you have nothing left. So, welcome back to Kingdom First, where we put God first in all things. And I'm excited to have this discussion today because I believe we've all been there, where the things that we have is just not enough. But the God that we serve is able to meet all of our needs if we have the faith to believe Him and ask Him for what we stand in the need of. So, first, I want to start off by reading 2 Kings 4 1 through 7. One day, the widow of a member of the group of prophets came to Elijah and cried out, "My husband who served you is dead, and you know how he feared the Lord. But now a creditor has come, threatening to take my 2 sons as slaves. What can I do to help you?" Elijah asked. "Tell me, what do you have in your house?" "Nothing at all except a flask of olive oil," she replied. And Elijah said, "Borrow as many empty jars as you can from your friends and neighbors. Then go into your house with your sons and shut the door behind you. Pour olive oil with your flask into the jars, setting each one aside when it is filled." So she did as she was told. Her sons kept bringing her jars, and she filled one after another. Soon every container was full to the brim. "Bring me another jar," she said to one of her sons. "There aren't any more," he told her. And then the olive oil stopped flowing. When she told the man of God what happened, he said to her, "Now sell the olive oil and pay your debts, and you and your sons can live on what is left over." Imagine being at rock bottom, and the children that you bared, the creditors are coming to take them as slaves. Now, this is what the widow was dealing with. She had nothing to her name. Her husband died, and now there's debts to be paid. And the creditors are looking to take her sons in exchange for those debts. Well, the only thing she knew to do was to go to Elijah and to let him know what was going on and ask for help. And when she asked him for help, that allowed God to do his greatest work by showing her that with the little that she had with oil, he could multiply it and give her abundance. So, the first lesson I have today is to bring what little you have to God. So, Elijah asked her what she had in her home. And the lady said that she had a small bottle of oil. Now, this shows us that it doesn't take a lot for God to multiply what little that we have. But it takes faith for us to give God the little things so that He can multiply them and make it a lot. So I want to ask you today, what do you have that God is giving you that you have looked at and said, this isn't enough? Is it your money? Is it your skills and abilities that you use to get jobs? What is it that you feel like you have not enough of that God can multiply and use it to make many? What if instead of focusing on what you don't have, you focus on bringing what you do have? How can God multiply what you don't give to Him? So that means that God is requiring us to give Him everything so that He can show us how He can use everything that we are and everything that we have to glorify His kingdom. The next point is obedience and faith. Elijah asked the widow to go to each of her neighbors and gather jars and to pour the oil in the jars. Now that requires an act of faith and trust because the widow didn't know how it was going to bring about an abundance for her. But she trusted God enough to do exactly as she was told. Now, I can say that if someone asked me to go to my neighbors and ask for something, I don't know if I would be so willing to do it. Sometimes our pride gets in the way. Sometimes we don't want people to know what we're going through. So we tend to hold things in and not say anything. But she had to go to her neighbors and ask for something and then risk the potential or risk them telling her that they didn't want to give it to her. Or maybe she risked the chance that they would gossip about her or talk about her. Or maybe she even risked the chance of them asking her what she needed them for. But she didn't worry about that. They went and got the jars and they got as many as they could. They didn't just ask for one, they said, "Give me what you have." And they ended up with a lot of jars. Obedience is the first step towards experiencing God's provisions and his abundance. That brings us to point number 3. God's abundance knows no limits. So the oil only stopped flowing when she ran out of jars. This is a powerful reminder that God's provisions is not limited by our willingness to receive. God has so much in store for us, but are we willing to do the things that he's asked us to do to be able to see it come to fruition? Are we limiting God by telling him what we have in our hands and what we can do with it? Or are we trusting God to say, "God, this is what I have. What can you do with it?" Or, "This is what I have, God. I'm placing in your hands to multiply it." We can't allow ourselves to use our human minds and place limitations on God, because there is so much that God wants to do in us, with us, and through us if we trust him enough to do exactly what his word says he can do. One thing we're reminded of is that when God blesses us, it's not just for us to hold on to. It's often so that we can meet the needs of those around us. God's abundance knows no limits. So the oil only stopped flowing when she ran out of jars. This is a powerful reminder that God's provisions is limited only by our willingness to receive. So had she only gotten one jar, the oil would have ran out immediately. But she got several jars from several people, which allowed her to have an abundance of oil when she was done. Now, we have to realize that when God gives us talents or gifts, or when he gives us things or places people in our lives, we have to be great stewards over them. We have to do exactly what he's called us to do. She couldn't allow her fear or being ashamed or any of those things get in the way of what God has for her. So how often have we placed limits on God by doubting his power to provide? The last point is God's provision is purposeful. So after filling all the jars, she sold the oil and paid her debts, and she had enough to live off of. God's blessings met her needs perfectly, showing that he provides with a purpose. So when God blesses us, it's not just for us to hold on to. It's often so that we can meet the needs of those around us, or to step into freedom as the widow did. And I can use myself for example. There have been times when I've had an abundance. And in those moments, God has called me to do various things, from buying clothing to give to the homeless, to buy coats for children to give out during the winter time, to give out laptops for back to school, to do school supply drives. God gives us extra or an abundance so that we can be a blessing. Now, I could have went out and I could have spent the money on various clothing items. I could have had the most expensive purses. I could have been riding around in expensive cars. But that wasn't what God called me to do. God wanted to see my heart in those seasons and to see how I would use what he's given me to be a blessing to others. And so I challenge you as well to do that. When God calls you to go feed the homeless, go and feed them. My family for years would go to a homeless shelter and we would just make meals and feed them. And the people would be so happy. I mean, they created a tip jar just to give us tips. And we weren't even looking for tips. We just wanted to give back to them what God has blessed us with. And so there will be seasons in your life where you're called to be a blessing. How are you going to steward that season and be a blessing to others? There are so many things that you can do. And here we are coming up on the holiday season. We have Thanksgiving, we have Christmas, and there are going to be people that are hungry. Are you willing to make a meal or share the meal that you have with those people? Or are you going to look past them and say, oh, somebody will feed them. That's not my job. Well, what if God taps you on your shoulder and says, I want you to feed them? Are you going to hear God's voice and be obedient? We can't look for blessings if we're not willing to be a blessing. Some of us want blessings upon blessings upon blessings, and sometimes we do get blessings. But oftentimes you can see whether a person is using those blessings for good or not for good. Like you can see how well a person does with the money that is given to them by how long they're able to keep the money. Some people, of course, they keep money for a long time. And as we know, the more that we pour out, the more comes back into us. Because it says in her story, God blessed her and he blessed her and he blessed her until they ran out of jars. And she was able to do exactly what she needed to do. And sometimes the purpose that God has placed in our heart is to do for others. So we have to be intentional about how we're helping others during the seasons that God has called us to be blessing to other people. As we wrap up this video, I just wanted to go over the 4 points with you again. First one being, bring what you have to God. Second, be obedient in your faith. The third one is trusting in God's abundance. And the fourth is recognize God's purpose. So I want us to think about something that we need to bring to God. No matter how small it seems, I want us to learn how to cast all of our cares on God. So I want you to take a step today and give that thing to God and ask God in faith to give you the provisions that you need to take care of that situation. Don't try to handle it alone. Don't sit around worrying about what you can't control, but give it to God and allow God to do what only He can do. And that's to give you the abundance or the blessings that you need to take care of that situation. And also to remember that when God gives you something, also remember to be a blessing to someone else. Because too much is given, much is required. And that requirement may be to be a blessing to someone else. So if you found this story encouraging today, I want you to like and share this video. I want you to leave a comment below letting me know your thoughts on the videos and what your takeaway was. And then I want you to continue to follow us so that you can listen to more faith-filled videos on how we can live a life that is pleasing to God. And so that we can put God first in all things by being kingdom first. So have a blessed day, and I will see you next time.